Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Paris Schutz has the evening off. On the show tonight,
now we're all survivors of gun violence here in Highland Park.
In the wake of Monday's mass shooting, a look at gun laws and restrictions in the northern suburbs and what advocates want to see changed.
I hope people don't forget.
Illinois doesn't ban military-grade guns. We look into why not and whether that could change. Former U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder on the state of American democracy and what he thinks can be done to fix it. The family members of a National Guardsman are demanding answers a year after the young soldier was killed in a drive-by shooting. Cases of monkeypox are on the rise. We'll talk with Chicago's top doctor about how to avoid getting it. And transforming 911 calls, a blueprint for overhauling the nation's emergency response system. But first, some of today's top stories. Derek Chauvin gets 21 years in prison for violating George Floyd's civil rights. During sentencing, the federal judge told the former Minneapolis police officer that pinning Floyd to the ground with a knee on his neck for more than 9 minutes was, quote, simply wrong and offensive. Chauvin will serve the federal sentence at the same time he serves his 22-year sentence on state murder charges. Chauvin made no direct apology nor expressed remorse to Floyd's family. Instead, he said that he wishes Floyd's children, quote, all the best in their life. The state of Illinois has its first black female Supreme Court justice.
I, Lisa Holder White,
do solemnly swear.
Do solemnly swear.
Justice Lisa Holder White takes the place of the longest-serving Illinois Supreme Court Justice Rita Garman, who retired today and symbolically handed her robes to her successor. Justice Holder White has served as an assistant state's attorney and as an assistant public defender. She later served as a circuit court and appellate court judge.
Oh, what a moment.
The mayor and civic leaders unveiled their vision for an updated and connected museum campus. Enhancements include an updated Soldier Field both inside, atop, and around the stadium, as well as easier transportation options, including for bikers. The plan also calls for creating an urban nature retreat by using native species to help tie the campus together, along with building a pedestrian bridge connecting to Northerly Island. The full report can be found on our website. Up next, the latest from Highland Park. Stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Communities across the northern suburbs are mourning the victims of Monday's mass shooting in Highland Park. 2 more vigils are scheduled for tonight. As neighbors remember those lost and offer their support to survivors, advocates for stricter gun laws are also organizing to call for change. We begin our coverage with Nick Blumberg, who joins us now from the site of one of tonight's memorial gatherings in Highland Park. Nick.
That's right, Brandis. March for Our Lives is holding a candlelight vigil shortly here at Sunset Woods Park. As you mentioned, these gatherings have been happening throughout the week in the wake of the mass shooting that claimed 7 lives this past Monday. Now, just under a month ago, March for Our Lives Highland Park held an anti-gun violence rally at this same park following mass shootings in Uvalde, Buffalo, and Tulsa, among others. Attendees then marched through Highland Park, in fact, right through the site of this week's mass shooting. Organizer Rachel JACOBY says about 400 people came out to show their support for tougher restrictions on guns.
Illinois and Highland Park specifically have really strict gun laws that keep us safe. Our neighbors don't. So here in Illinois, because Wisconsin and Indiana and Ohio and Iowa have much more lax gun laws, that makes all of us in danger because someone can just easily cross the border and get access to a gun that they wouldn't be able to have access to here in Illinois.
Now, JACOBY wants to see action at the federal level with things like universal background checks for gun buyers. Some local municipalities have tough gun restrictions. Highland Park and neighboring Deerfield have assault weapons bans. So too do Cook County and Chicago to the south. But putting local gun regulations in place isn't a sure thing. In 2013, the courts forced Illinois to pass a law legalizing concealed carry. That law also restricted what home rule municipalities could do in terms of gun restrictions if they didn't already have any on the books. Now, attorney Richard Cates, a former Village of Winnetka trustee, told me that that village scrambled to make sure they got something on the books before a narrow window closed.
We concentrated on the safe storage, so you had to lock. You could have guns, but you had to keep them under lock and key and have heavy security so that a child, for instance, couldn't get into it. The use of a weapon, the transportation of a weapon, and have some strict restrictions on assault weapons. The involvement.
Now, Kate says it's unfortunate that some municipalities can't enact local gun restrictions, especially since they have limited sway over what the General Assembly does.
Anything can happen with state legislation. So it's important that locally we maintain our rights to legislate in this area.
Now, despite various state and local restrictions, investigators say the accused Highland Park gunman was able to legally buy at least one of the weapons recovered after the shooting. He reportedly bought it online and picked it up at Red Dot Arms in far north suburban Lake Villa, according to the Daily Beast and CBS 2. Employees at the store refused to comment to us and would not confirm or deny whether the alleged shooter picked up a weapon there. I also spoke with North Suburban firearms expert and concealed carry trainer Marcus Melnick. He says he doesn't support things like assault weapons bans, calling them ineffective.
Nobody in the firearms culture wants someone who should not have access to firearms to get access to firearms. The FOID card does that. There are firearm instructors and professionals out there who say, well, that's still an infringement. At the same time, it is a background check on everyone, and if the system works correctly and the reporting is done correctly, that is supposed to limit gun ownership to people that shouldn't own firearms.
Now, as for whether the system worked correctly in the case of the accused Highland Park shooter, who police had previously flagged as potentially dangerous, Melnick says further investigation will offer insight into whether things went as they should. And he says despite calls for tighter gun laws, carrying a firearm can have effects beyond just self-defense.
It changes the way someone carries themselves. It also makes them more hyper-aware, maybe is too strong, but more aware of their surroundings so that they can avoid trouble.
But that outlook isn't likely to sway organizer Rachel JACOBY and other like-minded folks. March for Our Lives Highland Park is holding another rally this coming Saturday. JACOBY says it's important not to become desensitized to mass shootings.
We need to remember that this isn't normal. Living with this kind of gun violence and under this type of threat from gun violence isn't normal, and we all have the power to do something about it and to make our communities safe from gun violence.
Now, coming up, we'll talk with the Lake County State's Attorney Eric Reinhart. We'll also have more from this evening's vigil. Organizers say some 200 people are expected, with any funds raised going toward the Highland Park Community Fund to benefit victims, survivors, and first responders. But for now, Brandis, back to you.
Nick, thanks. We'll see you a bit later on. Now, we've just focused on gun control at the local and federal levels, but Monday's shooting has also sparked talk about what Illinois can and should be doing, especially given that the state issued a firearms owner's identification or FOID card to the alleged shooter even after the then teenager showed clear signs of trouble. Amanda Venicky joins us now with more. And Amanda, what have the state police said about that?
Well, Brandis, the Illinois State Police have defended their issuing a FOID to Robert Cremo III, despite Highland Park Police filing a clear and present danger report about a 2019 incident in which Cremo reportedly threatened to kill members of his family. State Police boiled this down to matters of timing and also threshold. There's no felony on record, and Cremo hasn't been admitted to a mental health facility. Plus, his dad had signed off on that FOID application. But Republican nominee for governor Darren Bailey says the buck stops at the top and blames Governor J.B. Pritzker and the state police under his jurisdiction.
The Firearms Restraining Act would have prevented the tragedy on the 4th, but you buried it. You left it moldering in some bureaucratic basement somewhere. Your watch, Governor. It's not enough to pass laws. You have to do the hard work to make sure that the laws do what they were intended to do.
He's referring to what is often called the state's red flag law, in which family members can petition the courts to temporarily remove guns from someone who is dangerous. Now, law enforcement also has that ability. We have previously reported on how relatively rarely that red flag has been used, though a new law signed by Pritzker does expand the act and puts money towards spreading public awareness about it. Bailey voted against that law. Now, Pritzker's campaign calls his opponent's position on guns extreme and points out that this spring, the Bailey campaign had raised money using gun raffles, including a gun similar to the one used in the Highland Park massacre. Asked about the raffles, Bailey says he was in compliance with the law and that most people buy guns for self-defense. Referencing that Highland Park shooting and spates of violence in the city, Bailey called for a special session of the legislature to address what he calls mayhem in our streets.
We must do whatever it takes to address the breakdown in mental health, particularly among isolated young men, which was made immeasurably worse during Pritzker's lockdowns.
Bailey says Illinois doesn't need more gun restrictions. It needs to enforce its current laws. But after the July 4th weekend violence, various organizations are calling for just that, like the Illinois Latino Agenda Coalition, which wants an assault weapons registry, also mandatory fingerprinting for all FOID applications. Now, a measure to do that also stalled in Springfield last year. Top on the coalition's list is also the #1 ask of the Gun Violence Prevention PAC.
We need to regulate weapons of war. You know, the shooter Monday had an M&P 15, a Smith & Wesson assault rifle, M&P, military and police. And so that is not, I don't understand why a civilian, why anybody needs a weapon with that kind of power.
State Representative Maura Hirschauer is sponsor of a measure that would ban military-grade weapons, but it didn't advance, despite Democrats holding super majorities in both chambers of the legislature and controlling the governor's office.
This session was fast and furious in Springfield. It was a shortened session. The bill did go to the Judiciary Criminal Committee and into a subcommittee, and there simply wasn't time to tackle it.
Now, subcommittees are where bills are put when, try as the sponsor might, they are there to die, or at the very least to be put on the back burner. Hirschauer says that she thinks of preventing gun violence as something like a jigsaw puzzle, and lawmakers, she says, have for the past couple of years fixed on pieces like anti-violence programs and funding for them, also aspects of criminal justice.
This happens to be, the assault weapons ban, happens to be, I think, a pretty good size puzzle piece that needed a jump start. And I hate that we live like this, but tragedies capture the attention of the public.
And it has. A Highland Park father who ran with his children during Monday's parade away from that gunfire started a change.org petition just this morning calling for Illinois to pass an assault weapons ban. Hirschauer's bill, exactly. It has, at last check, really just before the show started, amassed more than 21,000 signatures. GPAC says there have been similar efforts for years.
Until this point, we have felt like they're not politically viable. So that's why they haven't passed. If they were politically viable, they'd go up on the board and they'd be, signed, so I just think that the time has to be right. And I hope the time is right now.
Yeah. Did this change things? Do you think it is?
I do. But I hope people don't forget
She says advocates will be pushing to make sure legislators don't forget that they don't drop this. GPAC and other advocates have demands.
Legislators are going to take action as soon as they can. They have an upcoming special session. It's dedicated to choice. I think that's great, but they can do two things at once. And I hope they take this up.
Now, there has been no word on any special session. As you heard Sansa's reference, the governor, after the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe, did say that this month he would call one to take up abortion-related legislation, but that special session has been delayed, and there is no word on when it will happen. With that, Brandis, back to you.
Amanda, thank you. The former U.S. Attorney General under Barack Obama warns that American democracy is in peril. In a new book, Eric Holder argues that since the Supreme Court struck down parts of the Voting Rights Act in 2013, states have sought to suppress and restrict voting rights. Holder says what he calls this assault on democracy ultimately led to then-President Donald Trump's failed attempt to overturn the election on January 6th, and that it continues today. The book is called Our Unfinished March: The Violent Past and Imperiled Future of the Vote, a History, a Crisis, a Plan. And joining us now is former U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder. Mr. Holder, thank you for joining us. Let's start with this most recent mass shooting, which unfortunately hit very close to home in Highland Park. And it's yet another one, obviously. We've seen far too many of these. And when you see them happening again and again, what comes to your mind when thinking about potential solutions?
Well, first, you know, I'm angered by what you see. I feel for the people who are the victims, the family members, the survivors, but it's also an indictment of our political system. The American people are united around really some common sense things that would make those kinds of shootings far less likely to happen. Universal background checks, waiting periods, the banning of assault weapons. There's majority support for all of those things, and yet our political system does not have the capacity, it seems, to get out of the pockets of the gun lobby and do what the people want to do. So it means, I think, that those people who will not support the people when it comes to gun safety measures have to be replaced. And we do that by coming out, by voting, and by holding accountable those politicians who will side with the gun lobby as opposed to the citizens of this country.
Now, shifting to the January 6th hearings, members of the committee, they've been making the case that then-President Donald Trump attempted to orchestrate a coup to keep himself in power. You've noted a particular exchange between Trump and former acting Deputy AG Richard Donahue, revealed in the hearings as being particularly damning. Let's hear a little bit of Donahue's testimony on that.
So let's now put up the notes where you quote the president. As you're speaking to that, he said, the president said, just say the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman. So, Mr. Donahue, that's a direct quote from President Trump, correct?
That's an exact quote from the president, yes.
Now, since then, we've heard even more explosive testimony from former White House aide Cassidy Hutchinson. Based on what we've heard so far, Mr. Holder, have we seen enough evidence of criminal conduct that we could see the former president potentially criminally prosecuted?
Well, I certainly think we're getting really close to that point. I mean, that statement, you know, you just say it's corrupt and we'll take care of the rest. That call that he made to folks in Georgia, find me 11,780 votes. All this talk about it's difficult to find the necessary intent with regard to Trump's actions. That's belied by what you just played and by what I said with regard to that Georgia call. He was clearly had the intent to try to steal the election, to foment a coup. And I think that we are getting extremely close to the place where you're going to be able to say that an indictable case can be made against the former president. And if that's the case, he should be indicted. He has to be held accountable. And we have to also think that what happens in 2022, 2023 will send a message to the future. And we have to deter people who, like Trump, might try to undermine our democracy and remain in power, even though they don't have the support of the American people.
Of course, the Supreme Court, their term just ended a couple of weeks ago. They had a lot to get through, and only 1 in 4 Americans approve of the job the Supreme Court is doing. So I want to get your thoughts on, this slew of recent Supreme Court decisions. The Dobbs decision, which overturns the Roe decision, expanding gun rights, environmental regulation. A lot of this court's decisions, some critics are saying they are driven by more ideology than law. How can the court maintain its legitimacy if it's increasingly viewed as partisan?
Well, I'm not sure it's viewed as partisan as much as it is viewed, as you said, as ideological. What we are seeing in the court, certainly with regard to the decision that overruled the Roe decision, that was not a new finding. It wasn't some newfound law, some newfound facts. That was simply a change in court personnel. And that's not the way in which our system works. Courts make determinations, and then subsequent courts try to follow those decisions. It's called stare decisis, this notion of following precedent. And to the extent that that's possible, that's what you do. To overrule something that was almost 50 years old and upon which people had ordered their lives, upon which people have relied, on the basis that the court stated in that opinion by Justice Alito, really delegitimizes the court and puts at risk the way in which it is viewed by the American people. And so I would hope that the justices will not use the power they have simply because they have it, but use that power in a way that's consistent with the best traditions of the court.
In general, the Supreme Court has not always been right in its lifetime, right? There have been decisions that, of course, have been overturned. How then should the public know what court to trust?
No, that's a really good point. I mean, Plessy versus Ferguson was overruled by the Brown versus the Board of Education decision. The court has made other mistakes that it has, in fact, later corrected. But there's really nothing in the Roe decision, especially, to show that what the court did back, as I said, almost 50 years ago, was incorrect in the same way that Plessy was incorrect. And you look at where the American people are, the reliance that the American people had placed on the Roe decision. There was not a basis, as there was in 1954 in the Brown versus the Board of Education case. There was not a sufficient basis to overrule a long-standing precedent.
Okay, so let's talk about your book before we have to go. In broad terms, it is about the fight to win the right to vote and efforts underway to undermine that right. What made you want to write this book?
The state of our country and where we are with regard to our democracy. I say in the book, and I've said very publicly, I think our democracy is under attack. And so what I wanted to do was to examine previous times in our history when our democracy was under attack, how the American people responded then, talk about the current situation that we are confronting, and then put out some really specific ideas about ways in which we can make our democracy better, maybe in fact save our democracy. And I think the bottom line is, if you look at our history, we have seen people in the past confronted with constitutional governmental issues really come together, fight, and really make sure that the nation stayed true to its founding ideals. And I'm really confident that if we, as an American people, focus on these issues, commit ourselves to resolving them, we can save our democracy.
So some of those ideas that you mentioned that you do share in the book, you have ideas on fixing the elections, for example, with automatic voter registration, same-day registration and online registration, enfranchising the formerly incarcerated, making it easier to vote, making Election Day a national holiday. And then you also have ideas on fixing our institutions, including eliminating the filibuster in the Senate, ban partisan gerrymandering, ending the Electoral College and deciding the presidential election by popular vote, and ending life tenure for Supreme Court justices by allowing each president to appoint 2 justices over the course of their term, and those justices would serve for a limited number of years instead of lifetime. What hope do you have that some of these measures will actually come to fruition?
Yeah, it's a long list of proposals, all of which I think are really good ones and would really foster the notion of a healthy democracy. And so people will say, well, that's too much. We're not going to be able to accomplish all of that. And we can't have that kind of pessimism, because that leads to inaction. I think we have to be optimistic because that is what leads to consistent and concerted action. If you look at the history part of the book, I'm sure that at some point Dr. King and the people who surrounded him thought, you know, we're not going to be able to, how are we going to actually pull down a system of American apartheid? How difficult is this going to be, and how can we make that happen? And yet they persevered and they did it. And the proposals that I am making are not nearly as big as the structural changes that Dr. King and the civil rights movement brought about. So I think that, yeah, with concerted action, with continued focus, and with a commitment to making those things happen, our history tells us that we can make all those changes real.
We're almost out of time, but I have to ask you about this discovery of this unserved warrant in the Emmett Till case that would have charged Carolyn Bryant Donham with the kidnapping of Till. What do you make of that discovery and the call by some members of Till's family that she should be arrested?
Well, you know, warrants can go stale over time, and I'd have to look at, you know, what the warrant said, try to get a hold of the evidence that led to the warrant that made a judge make a determination that probable cause existed there, and also then take into account what the Justice Department, I think over the course of the last maybe 10 months or so, made a determination that there was not a basis to go forward. But I certainly think that's a piece of evidence that needs to be examined. But really importantly, the underlying documents that led to the judge's finding that there was a basis to have her arrested, that I'd like to put my hands on and see if there's anything new there that might lead to a reopening of the case.
Okay, that's where we'll have to leave it. Former Attorney General Eric Holder, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Once again, the book is called Our Unfinished March, The Violent Past and Imperiled Future of the Vote. A history, a crisis, a plan. You can read an excerpt on our website. And there's more Chicago Tonight just ahead, so stick around.
Don't miss one of our stories. Get them all delivered to your desktop or mobile device with a subscription to the WTTW News Daily Briefing. Go to WTTW.com/daily briefing and sign up.
A family is still searching for answers to why a 19-year-old National Guardsman was killed in the Belmont-Cragen neighborhood last summer. The family is now demanding State's Attorney Kim Foxx's office reevaluate the case. Joanna Hernandez spent time with the family as they prepared for a memorial service for the young soldier on the one-year anniversary of his death.
Lourdes Lara visits her son's grave daily.
He was in a point in his life where he was young. He was just beginning to live.
There are days she puts on music and spends time watering the flowers on his burial site.
Last year around this time, we were preparing to welcome him home, thrilled that he was coming home. And now our lives are changed forever.
19-year-old Chris Carvajal had graduated as a National Guardsman and was set to be stationed at a military base in Riverside, Illinois. Last summer, he was shot dead over 4th of July weekend.
He was invited to a party with his girlfriend. At one point, he decides to go to his car, and he was 3 cars away from his when he fell to the ground.
According to police reports, Carvajal was gunned down on July 3rd in a drive-by shooting. His family says detectives collected evidence, including witness testimony, but State Attorney Kim Foxx declined to press charges.
Her team decided that even with all the evidence and all the witnesses and a singled out person, it still wasn't enough.
In a statement, the Cook County State's Attorney's Office says they've reviewed the information presented by police and, quote, at this time, it was determined that the evidence was insufficient to meet our burden of proof to file charges. Almost a year later, the family's calling on Foxx to revisit the case.
He was working towards becoming a Chicago police officer as well. He was going to serve and protect your city. The minimal you could do, the least you could do, is bring justice.
Veteran Marcos Torres never met the young soldier, but has been working with the family to bring justice to the case.
What is the message that we are sending to our citizens here in Chicago and the rest of the United States? If you are doing the right thing, if you are serving your country honorably and respectfully, and you get killed right here in our own streets, and the people who are in charge to prosecute don't prosecute.
Jennifer Ramirez says she wants the world to remember her younger brother as the hardworking and loving young man he was.
We want the youth, so young kids, to follow his steps. You know, he had a bright future ahead of him, and he had many goals, and he was working towards those goals. And even though his life was cut short, he achieved many of those goals. And one of them was, of course, joining the National Guard.
This was my son's life, his atmosphere, his family.
As Lara flips through an album of her son's pictures, you can see a glimpse of the life Chris lived. A life, Lara says, is filled with family and friends.
No matter what I do, my son is not coming back. I would give up my life for my son to come back.
A grieving mother holds on to her faith that justice will come.
We take it one day at a time. The message I want to convey to the young people is don't give up. You are a voice for the city and your community.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Joanna Hernandez.
And the family is offering a $25,000 reward for information leading to an arrest. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, we hear from the Lake County State's Attorney about why he's calling for an assault weapons ban following the July 4th parade shooting. The World Health Organization says monkeypox cases are on the rise worldwide. What we know about the disease and how to avoid getting sick. And rebuilding the 911 system. We speak with the creator of a new blueprint that aims to modernize emergency communications. But first, some more of today's top stories. Mayor Lori Lightfoot is trying to reassure the public that safety efforts at city events are being redoubled in the wake of the Highland Park shooting.
By Tuesday morning, I had reached out already to the police department, the fire department, OEMC, and everybody who is involved in the planning of our large-scale events to say, what can we learn from Highland Park? What can we learn from Philadelphia? Are there things that we need to do in the events that are going to be taking place for the rest of the summer and into the early fall that we need to make adjustments or not? And obviously, I'm not going to go into here any details of what adjustments, if any, were made, but it is something that's always top of mind for us.
Meanwhile, the Taste of Chicago is back as a tiny taste, like in a amuse-bouche. This year's bite-sized food and music fest returns with more than 30 vendors and will be at its traditional Grant Park location starting tomorrow through Sunday. Admission is free, but food vendors will only be accepting credit cards or cash instead of food and beverage tickets. City safety officials say people attending events across the city should be aware of their surroundings and report suspicious activity to 911. And Chicago Bears player David Moore was arrested on drug and weapons charges over the 4th of July weekend. The team's new wide receiver posted $5,000 bond and was released from jail in his hometown in Texas. Moore was reportedly found asleep at the wheel by officers at a fast food restaurant and allegedly had marijuana edibles and 3 handguns in his car. The 27-year-old signed a 1-year, $1 million contract with the Bears in April. And now back to Nick Blumberg, who's been reporting today from Highland Park. Nick.
That's right, Brandis. We are joined now by Lake County State's Attorney Eric Reinhart. I know this is a difficult week for you, so thank you for joining us tonight. We appreciate it.
Absolutely, of course.
So at the bond hearing yesterday, the accused gunman was charged with 7 counts of first-degree murder. There was also some discussion that there may be additional charges forthcoming. What can you tell us about any possible additional avenues for prosecution?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me on. I continue to express my condolences to the families who lost their loved ones. We have dozens of individuals with gunshot wounds, and every one of those individuals has a right to justice. So we will have charges centering around each one of those people that was hurt by gunfire. This has been devastating to Highland Park. Highland Park will not be the same, Lake County will not be the same, and every one of those victims of a gunshot deserves justice. So there'll be more charges centering around each of those victims.
Yeah, I mean, you're a local resident, you know this community. How challenging has it been to prosecute this issue?
Yeah. Well, we've had amazing law enforcement. We had amazing first responders who ran towards the gunfire. Law enforcement has been unbelievable. FBI, ATF, the Lake County Major Crimes Task Force, Illinois State Police, the sheriff, City of Highland Park. the police not only protected people, but they made this case. They captured this gunman in a matter of hours. Their work to gather that evidence is going to make our job straightforward. And as hurt as the state's attorney's office is, as members of this community, we are focused. We are focused on justice. We are focused on serving each and every direct victim, as well as this community. We have victim witness counselors. We've had them here in the community every day since this happened. They're here tonight. We're at multiple events tonight, and we're here to support the community.
Yeah, how important is that to have that sort of, not just the prosecution, not just making sure that the alleged gunman, has his day in court, but making sure that the people who have been impacted directly or indirectly are cared for?
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, you have to have transparency. You have to tell people what's going on. You have to have people on the ground. We've had multiple counselors here every day. We've had our comfort dog here. We have everything in English and Spanish. We have a lot of Spanish speaker counselors, and we are here to listen to people, to be there for people, to tell them that this is going to be a process and that nobody should be alone during this time.
You've also spoken out since this shooting, calling for a nationwide assault weapons ban. What are your hopes that might accomplish?
We have got to stop these. There can't be another town going through this in a few days or in a few weeks. We must stop this. I don't want any other town to go through this. There can't be any more victims. Whatever it takes to do that. We have to have an assault weapon ban. We had it from 1994 to 2004. It had bipartisan support, and it had law enforcement support. We can do it in Illinois. We can do it in the United States, and we have to increase awareness about red flag laws here in Illinois.
Are you hopeful that there is the political will that these sorts of tragedies might result in further action?
I hope so. I've spoken to several state legislators. I've spoken to Congressman Schneider. My hope is that this can keep moving, but we have to find multiple ways to stop this. We have to have multiple ways to protect people. The people who lost their lives, their freedom matters. They've lost the freedom to live the rest of their life, but to live, to love, to learn, to do the things that we sometimes take for granted. They have lost those freedoms, and we have to figure out a way to get this balance right.
What's your message to folks who say, well, these sorts of bans might not be effective? For example, Highland Park did have an assault weapons ban. Unfortunately, this tragedy still occurred. What would you say to people who might push back on that?
Yeah, first of all, Highland Park has a ban, and this gunman didn't buy the weapon in Highland Park. He bought it in Lake County. I wish Lake County had that ban. That's not the fault of Lake County. The law says that individual counties cannot legislate on this. Cook County does have an assault weapon ban. As concerned as we are about the crime in Chicago, imagine if people were buying assault weapons in Cook County. It's hard to prove a negative sometimes, right? And so places that do have these bans are potentially safer than they would be. And of course, we should make it as difficult as we can to get the weapons. The fact that you can't be perfect and seal off a place doesn't mean that we shouldn't have common sense approaches.
All right, Lake County State's Attorney Eric Reinhardt, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll be back with more with one of the organizers of this evening's candlelight vigil. For now, Brandis, back to you in the studio.
Nick, thank you. The World Health Organization says since June 27th, it's confirmed 2,600 new cases of the monkeypox. That's an increase of about 80% worldwide. Here in Chicago, the numbers remain steady, but case counts in the state put Illinois in the top 4. Here to break it down is Dr. Allison Arwady, Commissioner of the Chicago Department of Public Health. Dr. Arwady, welcome back. So before we talk about monkeypox, let's do a quick update on the latest in the fight against COVID. Chicago's risk level remains high, according to the CDPH website. Are these 2 new subvariants the cause of that?
They are. The BA.4/5 are the most contagious version that we've had yet of COVID. That said, I can tell you that with the CDC updates tonight, we do expect actually Cook County and Chicago to move into that medium level again. We were just over the medium to high border last week. We're just under it right now. We do encourage people, though, while there is a lot of COVID around, to wear that mask when you're indoors and make sure you're up to date with boosters. But yeah, the news is still a lot of COVID, but generally no major new concerns at this point.
Okay, so monkeypox numbers worldwide. Help put this in perspective for us, please. World Health Organization says they're seeing a nearly 80% increase in cases globally. This sounds like a big jump. How does it sound to you?
It is a big jump. We have known about monkeypox for decades, but usually it has been a virus that we find more It's in rodents in particular parts of Africa, and sometimes we'll see some cases in those parts of the world more from interactions between humans and animals. What we're seeing now is really much more human-to-human spread. The numbers are still manageable at this point. We have 79 of those cases at this point have been diagnosed here in Chicago, but it's certainly, in a normal year, we would see 0, 1, maybe 2 cases generally in travelers. And now, of course, we are seeing cases in people who have not traveled, but have just had exposures, even here in Chicago. So it is different, but different than COVID. There are vaccines available. There are treatments available. It is not spread through casual contact. It's spread through really contact with somebody who has these lesions or long, prolonged, usually intimate contact to see spread.
How would you say the tracing of monkeypox and the spreading of it compares with COVID?
Yeah, so I'd say on the one hand, we don't worry about just people being out and about in public in a gathering on the subway. That's not the setting where we see spread. It really is about where people have had this more intimate contact, longer skin-to-skin type contact, often in intimate relationships, although not always. And so when we know who the contacts of someone who's been diagnosed with monkeypox virus, we can quickly get them the vaccine that really decreases their risk. And we've been doing that all along. If people have had contacts that are more anonymous, then we maybe can't know who all the people who you've had that more close intimate contact with. That, of course, becomes more challenging. And so we've also been starting to vaccinate in some higher risk settings where we know people may, have more anonymous intimate contact. But this is not like COVID because we have treatments, there is vaccine, and it's not spread, in this casual, more through the air kind of way.
And you said, it's typically in the past been found mostly travelers who are getting infected. Now it's people who are just getting exposed can be infected. The question is, who's most likely to be infected?
So at this point, most of the cases who have been diagnosed have been in men who have sex with men, but not all, I want to be clear. But it is people who have had this more, again, sort of intimate sexual type contact. So risk to the general public remains low. Risk to the population of men who have sex with men actually remains relatively low at this point, unless there are, multiple partners over short periods of time, et cetera. So we're strongly encouraging anybody who develops a rash and, they're not sure what it is, we want you to go see your doctor. We have a test available. Again, there's treatment available. If you do develop this, we can get treatment to you quickly that can decrease the risk. And importantly, we can get vaccine to any of your close contacts. So we didn't have any of that at the beginning of COVID. So I think this is really something that we are keeping a close eye on. We're anxious to have more vaccine available, and that's something the federal government has been working on. But lots of partners here in Chicago have been working hard to make sure that anybody who is at that really increased risk can get that vaccine, and we'll continue working on that.
Of course, you mentioned, typically it's spread through this intimate contact, but could a mask also protect, since we've gotten so used to wearing them over the last couple of years, could a mask protect from the spread of monkeypox?
Yeah, I'll tell you really when we think about the risk of spread for monkeypox, again, it's generally this skin-to-skin type contact. And where we think about people being in very close proximity, remember, we worry about people who are within 6 feet for 15 minutes for COVID. We're talking like minimum of 3 hours before we have a significant concern related to monkeypox. So for, masks are, we're not seeing this spread at this point at all in sort of the settings where you're moving through the world. The masks are really more important for those respiratory type interactions, and generally where we see spread, it tends to be with people who you have this really much more intimate, prolonged contact with.
And you mentioned treatment and vaccinations. Who can get vaccinated and where?
Yep. So at this point, because this is usually a very rare disease, there is not just vaccine available at your doctor's office. And we have actually gotten vaccine from the federal government. They're working to get much more. But at this point, anybody who is a contact of someone who is diagnosed with monkeypox, a close contact, we would be vaccinating. And we, in touch, you go to your doctor and we'll take it from there. They can, we've got it placed with various providers across the city. We can get you connected through the health department if needed, but you need to see the doctor. We We can't just give you a vaccine without having the diagnosis. The other thing is specifically for men who have sex with men who have had multiple or anonymous partners in the last couple of weeks, who have had sexual contact at sort of a venue that is more sexual in nature, or have exchanged sex for goods, money, etc. That would be who is eligible at this point, just because that is in this sort of more, that is the social network where we are seeing it spreading at this point. So vaccine is not for the general public at this point, and vaccine is not even for all men who have sex with men. Remember at the beginning of COVID when we didn't have a lot of vaccine available and it went to the highest risk groups, the people who were older and healthcare workers? This is the same approach. We're working to get it in. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Helpful information as always. Dr. Allison Arwady, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Up next, an effort to modernize emergency communications. But first, a look at the weather. The 911 emergency response system in the U.S. has been in use since 1968. A University of Chicago initiative aims to modernize and strengthen that system, and they've just published a blueprint for doing so. Joining us now with more is Executive Director of the Health Lab at the University of Chicago, Rebecca Newstetter. Rebecca, welcome back and thanks for joining us. So you are the principal investigator of this project. It is called Transform 911. Did your research uncover a very pressing need for change for 911?
Yes, thanks for having me. The reality is that everyone knows the number to 911, but virtually no one understands how the system works. And 911 is not a reliable pathway to health and well-being for everyone in America. And it does not prioritize the needs of the 911 professionals who, while many of us are thinking about taking summer vacations and making plans for holidays, 911 never takes a vacation. And these professionals who are dedicated to help solve and attend to our emergencies are classified as secretaries or administrative assistants by the federal government. And so one of the key issues that we're hoping to draw attention to today and through this Transform 911 blueprint is the pressing need to help support our 911 call takers across this country.
What resources would you say you're currently lacking in the existing system?
Yeah, well, there's so many aspects of the system that are currently undervalued and underattended to. In fact, in most jurisdictions across the country, your local pizza delivery service is going to be more likely to be able to reliably find you geographically than when you call 911. When you call 911, you expect that somebody is going to answer the phone and say, 911, what is your emergency? But in fact, in the vast majority of places, the question is, 911, where are you? Because the system has not been supported in a way in order for us to have the technology as well as the resources that the staff need to be supported and to run the system in modern ways.
You also write that, of course, despite whatever the emergency might be, the police are typically the first deployed. What other kind of responders could be used in a transformed 911 system?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I'm so glad that you brought that point up. We don't know exactly how many calls are made to 911 every single year. There's one national estimate that the National Emergency Number Association has produced that say that 240 million calls are made to 911 every single year. Many industry experts say that that's probably closer to about 300 million 911 calls every year. In any event, that's hundreds of thousands, about 650,000 at least 911 calls every single day that come into 911. And 75% of those calls, regarding research that we've done across the country, tells us that those calls are not about public safety needs and that the police are not well equipped to respond or attend to those needs. And so the vast majority of these calls, a quarter of the calls only really are the police well equipped to respond to. We need a massive ecosystem in order order to respond to the needs of communities, whether that's mental health workers or crisis response workers. But in any event, 911 today defaults to the police in pretty much every instance and relies on fire and EMS to a certain extent as well. But what we are calling for is for there to be a richer and diverse set of ecosystem options so that 911 professionals can make sure that the right responder is deployed at the right time.
What are some of the proposals that you all make in this report?
Well, primarily, we're looking to make 911 independent and equal. Across the country, most 911 centers are subordinate to police departments or fire or EMS departments. And we think that it's absolutely critical that 911 centers be independent and that the leadership be equal to that of other public safety partners, and that they are resourced in a sustainable and in a sufficient way. We are also looking to secure national level support for 911 in order to attend to some of the issues that I've just highlighted, including the fact that 911 professionals are classified as secretaries. That's a federal government decision that needs to be undone, and we all need to take an active stance in order to change that. We also need to make sure that we are reliably tracking 911, that we have strengthened data and tech standards to ensure that 911 of today is able to serve the needs of today.
Are there also some issues of mistrust with the public? They don't dial 911 because they know they're going to get the police response, and that's not what they want.
That's exactly right. And that's part of the problem of defaulting to the police when, in fact, the vast majority of 911 calls are not calls that the police are well trained or equipped to respond to. And police all across the country have been sensitive to this issue and have been asking for other resources to be put into place. The reality, however, is in that most jurisdictions, we don't have 24-hour round-the-clock across the entire municipality resources beyond the police. So when calls come in and a response is needed, we default to the police. And as a result, 911 has been confounded with the police. We think of them as one and the same, and they are not, which is why we are recommending that 911 be equal and independent.
Okay, that's where we'll have to leave it. Rebecca Neustetter, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Up next, we check back in with Nick Blumberg in Highland Park. But first, a look at some events happening this weekend. Now back out to Highland Park, where we check in with Nick Blumberg, who spent the day there. Nick.
Brandis, I'm here with Liza Tack, who's one of the organizers of this evening's vigil here at Sunset Woods Park. Thank you for being with us. I know it's a tough week and you've got a lot going on this evening, so thank you.
Thank you.
Why was it important to you to help organize this event?
So I've been involved with March for Our Lives since about my junior year of high school, so when I was 16. So it's been about 3 years, and I've been organizing and marching and doing this thing for as long as I can remember, but never has it hit my hometown quite like it just did. And just, it's really impacted, I feel like, all of us. So I really wanted to make sure that everyone in the community has a safe space to gather and mourn during this difficult period.
Yeah, how does it feel, even in the midst of such a horrible incident, to be able to see so many of your friends and neighbors and community members come together?
Honestly, it makes me feel really great. It's really a really emotional time, and seeing how our community is so strong and resilient and able to come together in a time like this and is here to support each other just really warms my heart, and it makes me proud to be a part of Highland Park.
What is your message to folks about the kinds of actions you would like to see in response to not just this shooting, but the many tragic mass shootings that we've seen in recent years?
I think the biggest thing that we all want to see is more gun reform, more red flag laws, and a ban on assault rifles. I know there was recently a new piece of legislation that was brought up called Aiden's Law that would put a ban on assault rifles, and I think that that's the kind of reform that we need right now. We know that these mass shootings, what is doing it are the guns. So what we need is to be able to control the amount that are out there and make sure that they don't get in the wrong hands.
And, you know, your message, in addition to the different reforms that you'd like to see in place, what sort of supports do folks need after something like this touches their community?
I think what we need to remember as well, like I said, like all those different reforms are necessary and important. Mental health is still very important and needs to be taken care of during this time. I know in our community they started some different support services at the local high schools and elementary schools, and I think it's really important to take advantage of that. So just making sure that you are taking care of yourself and your mental well-being is really important.
All right, Liza Tack with March for Our Lives, thank you so much for speaking tonight. That'll do it for us from Highland Park. Brandis, obviously an emotional day, a big outpouring here. This park has really filled up. For now, back to you in the studio.
Yeah, Nick, I was just noticing that it's filled up quite a bit in this hour that we've been talking. Thanks so much. And you can find much more on the Highland Park shooting, its aftermath, and a list of resources on our website. It's all at WTTW.com/news. We're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Thursday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website. You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night at 7 for the Week in Review. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm, and proud sponsor of programming that offers advice and strategies to enhance the physical and mental well-being of fellow legal practitioners in Illinois.
Professor T.
Charlie Turner, 6 years old, missing since last night.
And yet there's been no contact from whoever took Charlie.
Well, how did you know?
Most kidnappings involve a close family member. What are you implying?
I'm not convinced the professor's right about this one.
Next on WTTW.